This last spring, a man walked into an Iraqi restaurant here in Portland called Dar Salaam. It's where we have our interfaith gathering lunches every week. And apparently, while the rest of the guests ate and talked around him, this man, an Iraq War veteran named Damian Rodriguez, he refused to order. And instead, he stared straight ahead at all these photographs they have of the Iraqi countryside on one of these walls. Shortly after that, witnesses say that Rodriguez walked up to the cash register, started cursing about Iraq, and then threw a chair at a waiter's head, sending him dazed to the floor. The police were called. They quickly arrived to arrest this man, but for Gaith Sahib, the owner of Dar Salaam, the damage had already been done. Because Sahib, who runs Dar Salaam, he had already been the survivor of sectarian hate crimes, and he was very much shook up by this incident, in part because of that. In 2005, a car bomb near his home in Iraq put him in a coma. And though he lived, he ultimately was forced to flee his home and resettle in the United States right here in Portland. But, as Portlanders, we all know that last spring, hate crimes here in town had already been dramatically on the rise. Swastikas had shown up on school walls. A mosque received a letter that said, and I quote, "I will enjoy the sight of the blood of you and your fellow vermin running into the streets," unquote. And of course, last May, 2 people were killed in an attack by an avowed white supremacist on a MAX commuter train. Because of all this context, the incident at Dar Salaam was immediately framed as a hate crime, and authorities were eager to come down hard on this restaurant attacker. Those similar crimes typically merit misdemeanor charges. Prosecutors charge Rodriguez with felony-level hate crime and assault charges that carry mandatory prison sentences, and he's currently scheduled for trial in this December. At the time this all came out and went down, social advocates, justice advocates like myself, all cheered and said, "This is great. Justice served," right? But here's the thing. There are many now who know Rodriguez who say that this is where the case took a wrong turn. Rodriguez was a decorated Marine Sergeant Major, and he was forced to retire after his arrest. He'd spent years in combat. Friends and family say his actions were not provoked by hate, but rather by post-traumatic stress disorder, for which, despite repeated attempts to get help from the VA, he never received effective treatment. And presently, the question lingers as his trial approaches. Was this a hate crime to be prosecuted? Or is this the result of a trauma that needs healing? Our community story about these events will shape the life of Damian Rodriguez this coming December. Okay, little context. Last week, as we sat here in the dark, we all looked at the story of Nicodemus, the Pharisee who came to talk to Jesus in secret at night. And this week, we've come to the story, famous story, of the Samaritan woman at the well. And these 2 stories are very different on the surface, but where they are similar helps us to see something very profound about the way of Jesus. So, first, whereas Nicodemus is male, a member of the Jewish religious establishment, and a pillar of the Jewish community, the woman at the well is female. She's one of the despised Samaritans, and she has a complex personal history. Whereas the meeting with Nicodemus happens in Jerusalem, which at the time is the seat of religious power for the community, this transaction happens in Samaria, this little alcove that is the seat of religious dissidents inside the community. The one constant in both these stories is Jesus himself, who is inviting each person equally into his presence and into a new way of life. Jesus is not shown to be falsely impressed by Nicodemus's credentials or position. And likewise, he is not falsely condescending toward the Samaritan woman's lack of credentials and position. His kingdom is entirely outside these human stories. And instead, he treats them both with respect and dignity. But likewise, he challenges both of them with their different stories equally. He questions their preconceived narratives about themselves, and by doing this, by opening up the potential of a don't know mind. I just don't know. Maybe not. Jesus aims to lead them into a kind of deliverance, a liberation which he calls the spring of water that leads to eternal life. So today I want us to think about Dar Salam and Nicodemus and the woman of the well, and then also our own stories. I want us to think about our own preconceived tales, our own personal theories about how the world is set up, because if you're like me, you think you've got a pretty good grasp on it. Each of us has our own unique collection of stories, of course. Sometimes they bump up against each other. And each of us has these ideas that we hold on to as fact. And of course, naturally, our facts bless some people as heroes and damn other people as total jerks. Right? Every day, throughout the day, and depending on the moment or the circumstances, maybe our stories resonate more with figures like Nicodemus and the establishment, or maybe our stories resonate more with the woman at the well and with religious dissonance everywhere. Depends. Either way, our stories represent a personally tailored fiction suit that we wear around us, everywhere we go, into every situation. This is the world we know and are comfortable with. But what we are shown inside the text is that the voice of Jesus is always the voice of someone confronting with the world we don't know, with that mysterious world beyond our stories, always forcing us to ask the question, who would you be without your story? What would that kind of openness look like? And to help us think about it, because it's so hard to think outside our stories, I'd like to share with you the tale of someone named, some of you know who this is, Byron Kathleen Reed. Okay, who knows who Byron Katie is? That's what she calls herself. All right, a few handful of people. You're in for something great. Byron Katie is how she's known. She was a real estate agent from Barstow, California. It's a desert town, strip malls, it's ugly. I've been there many, many times to Barstow. And everything that follows here is her own account. In February of 1986, Byron Katie was 43 years old. And she found herself waking up inside a halfway house, the attic floor of a halfway house, in the midst of a very ordinary strip mall real estate agent life, 2 marriages, 3 children, and a semi-successful career. Katie had a 10-year long downward spiral into rage, paranoia, depression. This goes for like half the people I know, by the way. And she despaired. For 2 years, she was so depressed she could seldom manage to leave her house. She was so overwhelmed by what was going on in the world. She did business from the telephone, on her bed, in her pajamas. She could barely get herself to bathe or to brush her teeth. Her children would tiptoe past her room in order to not get yelled and smacked at or whatever else, because she was such a volatile presence. Finally, not knowing what else to do, at the end of the rope, she checks herself into a facility with women with eating disorders, because it's the only place that will take her and take her insurance. So one morning, a week or 2 later, after she's checked herself in, she's lying on the floor of her bedroom because she feels too unworthy to be in her bed. This is like the bottom. She's lying on the floor. But then one day, she sees this cockroach going across the floor, and she says she woke up without any concept of who or what she was. She had this break, and she says there was no me left there anymore. All my rage, all the thoughts that have been troubling me about the world, the whole world, all of it was gone, and instead, in its place, was this kind of insane laughter that just welled up from inside me all at once and poured out over everything, because everything was unrecognizable to me. It's like the definitions had been stripped off of everything in the world, including myself. It was as if, she says, something else had woken up. It opened its eyes. It was looking through Katie's eyes, and it was so delighted. It was intoxicated with joy, she said. There was nothing separate, nothing unacceptable. Everything was now part of my own self. Well, Katie, Byron Katie, she returns home after this breakdown, whatever you want to call it, and immediately everyone could tell things are entirely different from Mom. And when it became clear that the old lady was not going to come back anymore, people began to ask what was different, what had happened. It seems this breakdown had become something of a breakthrough. And now this woman radiated something so different, people wondered, did a miracle occur? Is this enlightenment? What is this? And soon people were gathering around her house. There were little meetings all around, and it swept over the town and over California and eventually the country. I met her for the first time in New York in a room filled with hundreds of people, 10 years after this moment. So she wasn't much help in the beginning. What happened to you? And she didn't know. She couldn't talk about it for years very intelligently. She said that a kind of freedom had woken up inside of her. And then she said that through a kind of inner questioning, she had realized that all of her thoughts and stories about herself simply weren't true. All of it was baloney. What would that be like? Now, it is this processing of inner inquiry, this examination of her own stories, that I want us to focus on as part of the Byron Katie tale. Byron Katie calls it the work of inquiry, taking apart all your stories about yourself, interrogating how you think the world is set up, and looking at what the world might look like if you didn't believe it. And she suggests that every single thought that causes us pain and suffering or discomfort can, under investigation, be revealed to be not true. And of course, this sounds absolutely insane. So bear with me for just a second. The assertion here is that the only time we suffer is when we believe a thought that argues with what is. If you want reality to be different from what is, you might as well try to teach a cat to bark. It won't happen. You can try a whole campaign around getting a cat to bark, but it will be hopeless. It won't work. You might even win awards for it. They might even put you through seminary for it. But it won't work. And you won't win. And if you pay attention, you realize that we think thoughts like this dozens of times every day. We're always going around imposing our stories and judging people and the world when it doesn't quite match up. We say things like, my children should be well behaved. My neighbors should take better care of their lawn. My partner should agree with me more. Or even, like today, there are hate crimes happening all over the city. And people should never commit hate crimes. These thoughts might mask themselves as something righteous, something that we should pat ourselves on the back for. But let me tell you, they are simply a different way of wanting reality to be different from what it is. And I've got bad news for you. It's not going to happen. Wanting and wishing and complaining will not make it so. Only never. Instead, Byron Katie argues, and I'm going to argue that Jesus says the same thing, that whenever we have a thought that argues with what is, we are going to lose. That a kind of radical acceptance is required. And for instance, she goes around saying things like, How do I know the wind should blow? Because it's blowing. Right now. How do I know you should all be looking at me suspiciously? Because you are. Right now. In this place. Now, people new or unfamiliar to this way of thinking might have the thought that I had at first as well. You might say, but it is completely disempowering to stop my argument with reality. If I simply accept reality, I'll become passive. I'll let injustices walk all over me. I might even lose the desire to act, but that is not the case. And I ask you, what is more empowering? Saying, I wish there weren't hate crimes. Or, there are hate crimes. Now, what am I going to do about it? The work of Byron Katie reveals that what you think shouldn't have happened, maybe shouldn't have happened. And we know because it did. It should have happened because it did, and this is Byron Katie's working definition of the Hebrew God Yahweh, which she translates, along with Martin Buber and many others, as I am that which is. And she suggests that when we learn truly to accept and even love what is on the surface of it, as it is right now, we are loving God or not loving God. And our minds have the choice to become clear and at peace and effective or not. Now, this does not mean, of course, I hope you all know me well enough by now, that means we just go around condoning and accepting, approving of everything that everyone does. I don't think it means that. But it does mean that once we let go of our inner struggle, our ego struggle and resistance with what is, once we forgive reality for being what it is on the surface of it, once that happens, we stop arguing with the truth of the world as it presents itself, and only then can we see past our own dogma. Can we get around the clump of our own false story that we use to judge others, and once that's past, only then do we see clearly. Do we become a living conduit of God's forgiveness first, which is always how Jesus leads, and then love, and then transformation. Back to the story of Damian Rodriguez. In 2004, he went to Iraq as a 27-year-old platoon sergeant. And his initial tour was widely thought to be one of the deadliest 6 months of any American engagement in the Iraq or Afghanistan wars. The horrors he encountered there, the people killed in front of him, the people he himself killed, they're not probably the best for me to repeat on a Sunday morning. But they took their toll. They wore away at him. A man, like so many others, who was trained to kill by our government, but never trained on how to live with it for the rest of his life. Amen. Never trained how to go home again. Instead of giving him the kind of evidence-based treatment that proved successful for PTSD, in many cases, his symptoms were treated disparately individually and pharmaceutically, with Ambien, Valium, and of course, a little self-medicating alcohol. And his story is that it was a mixture of these things that led to his break, his anxiety attack at Dar es Salaam. After several minutes of not ordering, he said loudly that he had to get inside the restaurant, had to get out of the restaurant. Others say that he tried to go to the first door, it was a service door, it was locked, and that was when he panicked. And in a kind of fugue state, he picked up a chair to throw it to get out, and it did hit somebody. But it was only their shoulder. No mark was left. But he was arrested. This man, he was a white man. He was a guy who fit a lot of what we needed to vilify at the moment. But he was raised by a Nigerian stepfather, married to a Guatemalan woman, next-door neighbor, an Iraqi citizen who helped take care of his kids the entire war. He used to say again and again, as they took him, "You think I could hate the Iraqis? I gave my soul away for the Iraqis." Is this a crime to be persecuted? Or is this a trauma to be loved and accepted and healed? This does not sound like a hate crime to me. And if we are to become, in our own lives, the kind of prophetic, transformational voice that I know we all want to be, And not just the voice of our own personal story, our ego personal politics playing out over everyone. Our own thoughts and perceptions must be interrogated just as rigorously as all the evils we think we see out there. I'm not saying we don't confront it. I'm saying this is how we start confronting it for real. Our own preconceived stories must be examined. All our little tales that we spin and dress ourselves in, because this too is how we are born again. This is how it happens. And it's that being born again by the Spirit of truth that Jesus talks about. And this is what I believe happened to Byron Katie. And this is what I believe can happen to any one of us. Because in truth, we are none of the stories that we tell about ourselves. And that's a fact. We are none of the little fiction suits that we wear around town. And every once in a while, we get a glimpse of remembering that. And I'm going to argue that whenever you get it, and you can think of that moment when it happened to you last, we remember that there is a bigger, more joyful world right outside the prison walls of our own definitions. And being born again isn't about being born in and being converted into something. It's about being converted out of something. It's about seeing what the world is outside our stories and recognizing that all those breakdowns that we are perpetually trying to ward off to be accepted inside our communities might in fact be breakthroughs trying to happen inside each and every one of our lives.
Amen.
So, let us consider the possibility that it's right here. We are not stuck with them, they're stuck with us. That it's about to happen, and it can happen in the context of your own life, because the living voice of Jesus is also the living Spirit inside us, always asking that question: who would you be without your story? The world wants to know. Amen. Okay, let us pray. Gracious God, in our hearts, it's said that there is a spring that leads up to eternal life. Somewhere inside our spirit is a font of every blessing. Gracious God, underneath all the PR, all the media, all the stories we release about ourselves in the world, in this place, grant us some small taste of that freedom, that life, that infinite space. Today we lift up not just those listed in the bulletin, not just the names of those people in our own lives who need so much prayer. We lift up each other, our city, our country, and the world, and ask for healing. Gracious God, let us be some part of that spirit. Let it live and breathe and have its movement in our lives. And in repeating the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples, let us rededicate ourselves to that spirit of truth right here in this room. Our Father and Mother, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.